Oh, look, Eleanor. The shadow guest actually showed up this year. My uncle, Robert Kane, delivered the hook with a loud, theatrical chuckle that carried easily over the clinking glasses and string quartet music filling the ballroom. He didn't even look at me. He was addressing my mother, who simply offered a strained, almost regretful smile that was worse than any direct insult. That smile, worn thin over decades of managing the Kane family facade, was the true measure of my exclusion. It spoke volumes. I wish you hadn't come. You are complicating the performance. My name is Anya Kane. I am 35 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have been the ghost daughter. The only child in the formidable Kane family lineage who dared to leave the family business, Kane Retail Group, KRG, to pursue my own career in global financial logistics. To my family, a career based on algorithms, data streams, and automated transactions was invisible, intangible, and therefore irrelevant. They measured life in square footage of retail space and the weight of physical inventory. I measured it in milliseconds of data transfer and predictive accuracy. The context and character intro was simple. The Kane family defined life by visibility and physical assets. KRG was a respected, decades-old national department store chain, run by my father, Arthur, and meant to be inherited by my older brother, Liam. Liam, 38, was the anointed heir, charismatic and publicly successful, the embodiment of the tangible, old-world prestige my family valued. I, however, had left KRG after a brutal argument over the need for technological upgrades, which Arthur dismissed as digital nonsense. My punishment was systematic exclusion. I lived in a universe parallel to theirs, unseen and unacknowledged. The background conflict was rooted in that professional split, deepened by a continuous stream of financial mockery. They didn't just forget me. They actively ignored my existence to validate their own traditional path. My job, running a highly specialized firm named Nexus Alpha, was never discussed. They assumed I was merely doing data entry or managing a small self-funded charity. They never invited me to board meetings, never asked for advice, and never included me in family trips. Liam, especially, delighted in my supposed failure to reach the real world of retail. He once publicly asked if my income was enough to cover the price of his cufflinks. The current event trigger was the annual Kane Foundation Gala, the biggest social and business event of the year, held in a gilded ballroom overlooking the city harbor. It was designed to showcase KRG's stability and public goodwill. I was invited only at the insistence of my elderly Aunt Martha, who still sent me a polite email every year, a thin thread of connection I maintained only for my own sense of duty. The humiliation scene began immediately. Liam, impeccably dressed and surrounded by KRG's primary banking partners, spotted me across the room. He walked over, his smile predatory and fake, leaning in close so the financiers could hear his condescension. "Anya, good to see you, sis," Liam boomed, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You really should get out more. Still doing, what is it, donation management for some obscure nonprofit?" "I run Nexus Alpha, Liam," I corrected him calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. The truth was, my company was now a significant player in optimizing complex logistics for governments and large corporate clients, but I knew the literal title would mean nothing to him. Right, the spreadsheets," he waved a dismissive hand. "We all appreciate quiet work. But the real world is here, Anya. It's about tangible assets, inventory, people, not little data streams. Dad and I are closing a major expansion deal tonight. This is what legacy looks like." He paused, looking at my simple, tailored dress. "I hope your little foundation is managing to keep the lights on. We wouldn't want you getting stuck with the bus fare home." My mother, Eleanor, drifted over, her face etched with exhaustion and worry that had nothing to do with me. She was clearly anxious about the alleged expansion deal. She bypassed any greeting and focused her gaze on Liam. "Liam, darling, did you confirm the figures with Mr. Sterling?" she whispered frantically. "Arthur is so stressed. If this expansion doesn't go through, the press—" "Mom, please, not in front of Anya," Liam interrupted, frowning, subtly ensuring the bankers understood my irrelevance. "She wouldn't understand the gravity of a $50 million line of credit. She's only used to dealing with, what, petty cash?" He smiled thinly at the bankers, inviting their shared amusement at my expense. They laughed, a short, patronizing, knowing laugh that echoed the years of dismissal. They saw a woman with a clean dress and an air of quiet efficiency. They saw irrelevance. They were so focused on their big, tangible expansion deal that they failed to see the catastrophe brewing beneath their feet. I, however, knew the exact figures, the terrifying, precise truth. The proof of worth revelation was concealed in my work. Nexus Alpha was not a charity. It was a boutique financial firm specializing in distressed asset acquisition and supply chain optimization for mid-sized commercial entities. For 3 years, I had quietly built systems that predicted financial collapse in the retail sector with near-perfect accuracy. I wasn't just observing the market. I was predicting its seismic shifts. 6 months ago, my algorithm flagged KRG. Their reliance on an obsolete inventory system and their attempt to close a last-minute $50 million credit line to fund an expansion. They couldn't. Afford was a classic profile for catastrophic default. The firm had been bleeding cash for 18 months, a fact they meticulously hid beneath the facade of the Foundation Gala. I knew Arthur and Liam were not closing an expansion deal tonight. They were desperately trying to secure the final critical tranche of that $50 million loan. If they failed to secure it by midnight, KRG would default on its current bond obligations, triggering an automatic bankruptcy filing at dawn. The entire company, the entire family name, hung by a single digital thread. I had spent the last 2 months working in secret. I hadn't made a donation. I had executed a hostile protective maneuver designed not to save them out of charity, but to buy them out of necessity. I took a breath and stepped toward the banking partners who were standing awkwardly near Liam. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Davies," I said, using the financiers' names, my voice calm but sharp. "I believe you're here tonight to discuss the completion of KRG's $50 million credit facility." Mr. Sterling, the lead banker, looked startled. "Ms. Kane, that's private board matter. Your brother—" "I know," I cut in, my eyes fixed on Liam's face, which was draining of color as he grasped that I knew too much. "But you'll find that your discussions are irrelevant now, because at 4:30 p.m. this afternoon, you lost the ability to extend that credit line to Kane Retail Group." The entire conversation stopped. The bankers exchanged panicked glances. Liam sputtered, his carefully constructed composure dissolving. "What are you talking about, Anya? Get out of here! This is sabotage!" "I'm talking about Section 3.2 of your own bond covenants, Liam," I continued, ignoring him and addressing the stunned bankers directly. "The one that triggers an immediate mandatory transfer of collateral management if the existing bondholder defaults. You didn't default yet, but your financial instability triggered the sale clause, and I had the foresight to buy that entire distressed bond portfolio." Liam's jaw dropped. "You bought the bond? It was valued at $20 million. Where would you get—" "Nexus Alpha has a liquidity pool far exceeding $20 million, Liam. You simply weren't paying attention to the right kind of balance sheet," I said. "I bought the bond. That means that your collateral is now mine, and your immediate need for cash to cover the pre-default fees is a liability that only one entity can address." I pulled a small, silver flash drive from my clutch and placed it on the table near the champagne bucket. A symbolic shift from physical wealth to digital power. Inside this drive is a fully structured, non-dilutive, zero-interest capital infusion of $55 million for Kane Retail Group. It is the exact amount needed to clear the pre-default fees, stabilize your operations, and fund your necessary technological upgrades for the next 2 years. "Arthur," my father finally stepped forward, his eyes wide with terror and a desperate glimmer of hope. He looked older than 65, the years of maintaining the facade finally catching up to him. "Anya, why? Why would you do this? After all these years of being ignored?" The turning of tables was now complete. My voice was cold, professional, and unyielding. "I didn't do this as a gift, Dad. I did this as an acquisition. The money is transferred from the Nexus Alpha Foundation, a legal entity designed to absorb distressed assets that align with our core values. The infusion is a convertible note, with 2 immediate, non-negotiable terms." I looked directly at Arthur and then at Liam, stripping them of their perceived authority in front of their partners. Term 1. The entire $55 million must be used exclusively to upgrade KRG's inventory and supply chain technology. That means replacing the ancient system you refused to retire a decade ago, the one that is currently bleeding you dry. Term 2. Effective immediately. The voting rights on my newly acquired bond collateral grant me 51% of all executive board appointments. Liam Kane is hereby relieved of his duties as Chief Operating Officer for repeated professional negligence and reliance on outdated infrastructure that nearly bankrupted this company. I, Anya Kane, am taking his seat, and I am the new CEO of Kane Retail Group. Liam let out a strangled cry of rage and betrayal. You can't fire me! I'm the heir! I'm the son. This is illegal! Your worth, Liam, was based on bloodline, I stated, my gaze boring into him. Mine is based on capability and the $55 million check I just wrote. Your financial mismanagement put 3,000 jobs at risk. My algorithm identified that failure, and my capital saved it. The board will vote for the one who holds the survival check. And I already have the votes, thanks to the bond covenants you never bothered to read. I picked up the flash drive. Mr. Sterling, Mr. Davies, I addressed the stunned bankers. Please inform your respective firms that KRG is now financially solvent and under new, technologically driven management. And Liam, I finished, tossing him a discreet sealed envelope containing his severance package. Your dead-end sister just bought your legacy. You're welcome to apply for a mid-level manager job once you've learned basic logistics. The ballroom dissolved into a frenzy. The bankers, now seeing an opportunity rather than a disaster, scrambled to contact their firms, their expressions shifting from panic to calculating respect directed entirely at me. Arthur, his head in his hands, looked utterly defeated. Eleanor, my mother, rushed to him, but her whispered words were not comfort. They were frantic questions about what this meant for the house. The emergency board meeting was called for 9 a.m. the following morning. I spent the night in my office, not out of necessity, but to feel the weight of the new authority settling over me. The company I had been forbidden to save was now mine to command. The next morning, the KRG Board of Directors, a group of old-guard traditionalists who had dismissed me as a child 10 years prior, sat at the long mahogany table. Arthur sat at the end, looking diminished. Liam was absent, having been refused entry by the new security team I had immediately installed. I entered the room, not as the shadow guest, but as the CEO. My presentation was clinical, concise, and devastating. I laid out the 10-year failure of the old retail model, using the very data streams Arthur had scorned. I detailed Liam's mismanagement, showing how his pride had masked a near-fatal incompetence that had cost the company millions. The infusion of $55 million from Nexus Alpha is not a loan, but a hostile, yet necessary capital injection, I stated, addressing the silent room. The terms grant me 51% of all voting rights, and the CEO title. The alternative is immediate, irrevocable bankruptcy. One board member, old Mr. Thornton, a family friend, cleared his throat, attempting one last weak defense. Anya, your expertise is impressive, but KRG is a retail firm. We need a retail CEO, not a data CEO. Arthur has decades of experience. Arthur's decades of experience nearly drove this company into the ground. Mr. Thornton, I interrupted, my voice cutting through his nostalgia. Retail is no longer about storefronts. It's about logistics, predictive inventory, and a seamless digital supply chain. That is my domain. Arthur retains his founder's title, but is relieved of all executive duties. If anyone wishes to vote against the infusion, please state your name now. But be aware, you will be responsible for the 3,000 jobs lost and the immediate dissolution of the Kane legacy. The silence was the answer. The motion passed unanimously. I was the CEO. My first act was to formally terminate Liam. He attempted a dramatic confrontation at the headquarters, waiting for me near the elevators. You stabbed me in the back, Anya, he hissed, his face contorted with 10 years of entitlement suddenly vaporized. You used your little hacker games to destroy my life. I used my intelligence, Liam, I countered, looking at him with cool detachment. You almost destroyed 3,000 lives in our family's solvency through your arrogance. The only thing I destroyed was your illusion of inherent worth. You are welcome to the severance package. Leave the building immediately. I watched him go, the once golden heir now reduced to a defeated man carrying a small box of personal effects. The revenge felt clean, surgical, and necessary. The consolidation and resistance, the weight of the legacy. The next 2 years were a relentless campaign of transformation. My initial relief at the takeover quickly gave way to the crushing weight of Arthur's failure. KRG was far more distressed than my algorithm had initially projected. The inventory system was not merely obsolete. It was actively fraudulent, masking massive levels of obsolete stock. The $55 million infusion was not just to upgrade technology. It was to cover the operational losses caused by the failure to recognize the digital reality. Arthur and Eleanor attempted every subtle, passive-aggressive tactic to undermine my authority. Arthur, still acting as founder emeritus, would appear in department meetings offering anecdotal, irrelevant advice about customer feeling and physical displays, hoping to sow doubt among the remaining longtime staff. Eleanor began a quiet campaign of social sabotage, calling old board members and family friends, suggesting that I was unstable, that my digital methods were unproven, and that I had coerced Arthur into the deal. I responded to their resistance with cold, calculated transparency. I forced Arthur to attend town halls where I publicly unveiled the data detailing the firm's near bankruptcy, meticulously tracing the source of the failure back to his refusal to modernize a decade ago. I used his own public failure as the justification for my absolute authority. Eleanor's social sabotage was countered by Nexus Alpha's PR team, who began releasing carefully curated stories detailing my ascent, the genius daughter who saved the family legacy from ruin. The narrative quickly shifted. I was no longer the shadow guest. I was the brilliant, quiet savior, and their previous dismissal of me was recast as the tragic myopia of an older generation. The most challenging conflict was the emotional void. I had spent 10 years working towards this victory, fueled by the burning desire to prove my worth. Now, sitting atop the wreckage of the family business, I realized the immense personal cost. I had destroyed my relationship with my father and brother, not out of professional zeal, but out of a desperate need for recognition. I was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar logistics firm, but I was fundamentally alone. The success tasted like ash. However, I reminded myself of the 3,000 employees whose jobs I had saved. I looked at the new data streams flowing through the company, the optimized supply chain, the reduced waste, and the increased profitability. My victory wasn't personal. It was structural. The ultimate humiliation, the land asset reveal. 2 years into the transformation, KRG was renamed Nexus Kane Logistics, NKL, and had shed all its retail stores, focusing entirely on its core logistics strength. It was profitable, technologically dominant, and fully integrated with Nexus Alpha. Arthur and Eleanor, having lost their final appeals and attempts at sabotage, were forced to watch as I put the old sprawling KRG headquarters building up for sale. This building was Arthur's second great love, the physical embodiment of his success. Arthur requested one final private meeting in the empty, echoey space before the sale closed. "Anya," he said, walking through the dusty, dark corridors of the building he had founded. "I accept everything. You won. You saved us. But please don't sell this building. It holds the only family memory we have left. Let us buy a small piece of it back, just the ground floor. We can turn it into the foundation offices. A token of the past. The past, Dad, is gone," I replied. "The future is logistics and data. But the land, Anya." "The land," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "That land was the first asset I bought. It's the foundation of everything we built. Don't let strangers take the physical legacy." I looked at the desperate, broken man. It was time for the final, ultimate revelation, the truth I had held secret for 15 years. "You're right, Dad," I said softly. "The land is the foundation of everything. You always taught me that. That's why 15 years ago, before I ever left KRG, I made my very first investment using the small inheritance Grandma Martha left me." Arthur frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That inheritance was only $50,000. "It was enough," I said. "I didn't buy stocks or bonds. I bought a small, forgotten, legally ambiguous commercial easement. A thin, triangular slice of land directly beneath the old KRG loading docks, adjacent to the rail line." Arthur went pale. He, a real estate mogul, knew exactly what an easement meant. The rail line easement? That thing was worthless. It was worthless only when KRG was the primary user, I confirmed. But when I left the company, I started quietly buying up surrounding distressed commercial easements. Over 10 years, I established a controlling interest in the entire logistical access corridor that services this headquarters, the rail lines and the major interstate off-ramps. Arthur stared at me, comprehending the horror. You mean that for the last 5 years, whenever KRG needed to move inventory, whenever Liam signed a major shipping contract?" "He was using land controlled by Nexus Alpha," I finished. Your company has been reliant on my initial investment since 2018. Your physical assets were a mirage, Dad. The real asset was the logistics access, and I owned it. You prepared for this? He stammered. You knew you would buy us out? I prepared for the possibility that the intangible would always defeat the tangible, Dad. I didn't save your business just with capital. I saved it because I already owned the strategic advantage. I didn't just buy the company. I bought the access road to the company. The knowledge that I had been subtly controlling their essential logistics for years, the knowledge that his own daughter had, secretly become the invisible master of his domain, was the final crushing blow. He didn't rail or threaten. He simply sagged against a cold pillar, his strength utterly gone. The final resolution and true closure. I sold the headquarters building, but not the land beneath the logistics corridor. That land remains my most secure, non-transferable asset, leased back to the new owners. A continuous, permanent flow of revenue tied directly to the physical economy my father had prioritized. Arthur and Eleanor moved into a small, elegant retirement condo. They were financially secure, but emotionally bankrupt. They never recovered their social status. Eleanor stopped attempting to manage my public image. She merely watched my relentless success in silent, defeated awe. Liam, following my advice to learn logistics, eventually secured a functional, quiet management role in a regional trucking firm. He never regained his corporate ambition, but he found a modest, real stability built on genuine competence, not on the illusion of inherited entitlement. Years later, I hosted a small private dinner not in a ballroom, but in the streamlined, functional meeting space of the new NKL headquarters. The only attendees were my retired Aunt Martha, who had faithfully sent those annual invitation emails, and my lead financial team from Nexus Alpha, my chosen family. Arthur and Eleanor were not invited. I had sent them a Christmas card, a generic, pleasant note signed with my corporate title. Aunt Martha, now frail but sharp-eyed, raised her glass. To Anya, she whispered, the quiet one who saw the truth. Thank you, Aunt Martha, I said, my voice rich with genuine emotion. You know, Arthur talks about you now, she confessed. He doesn't talk about KRG, he talks about the algorithm. He says you were right. He says he wasted 10 years being foolish. He wasted 10 years ignoring his daughter, Aunt Martha. I corrected gently. The company was just the stage for the performance. I sat there, looking out over the illuminated city, realizing the true nature of my victory. I had achieved the unachievable. I had forced the visible, tangible world to bow to the power of the invisible, intangible one. I was the CEO of a global logistics giant, debt-free, and operating with absolute control. The moral closure was profound. The greatest victory was not the $55 million infusion, nor the CEO title, nor the crushing of Liam's ego. It was the realization that my worth was defined by the predictive power of my mind, not by the approval of my family. I had used their deep-seated scorn, their decade of ignoring me, to build the silent, overwhelming power that ultimately bought their survival. I was no longer the shadow guest. I was the undeniable foundation upon which their very name rested. My donation saved their business, but my intelligence bought their future, and in the end, I walked away with the only thing that mattered, my own self-made respect. The ghost daughter finally took her seat at the head of the table.